Hello.
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm well. How about you?
I'm wonderful. We're really excited about being on another uplifting impact conversation.
Woo! Let's converse.
Let's converse. What are we talking about today, Justin?
All the stuff.
Okay, let's do it then.
All the things. A little more specific than all the stuff and the things. We're talking about groundbreaking.
hmm
Yeah. So, all the things about what it means to grow, to flourish in ground that's maybe a little unusual, a little outside of our comfort zone. You know something about that?
I do. I
Yeah.
do, sir. I feel like I spend a lot of my time outside of my comfort zone.
Yeah. But that's also a great place for us to thrive and to grow. This might be something that people don't know about you, but you have turned into quite the gardener around our house. Lots of flourishing. Oh yeah, and
Not
that's like one of like 70 of them, which I think is actually kind of awesome. And what I've learned quite a lot about discomfort is the ways in which plants have different personalities and they grow and they thrive when there's a certain amount of tension. So I've heard Deanna many times like, oh, this plant's getting too comfortable over here. I'm going to move them over there. And then they flourish and they grow.
yeah.
Right.
That's actually exactly what happened with this plant behind us.
Mm-hmm.
Because let me just do a little plant bragging here, plant mom bragging. That plant we almost threw away because it had like 2 or 3 leaves on it. I mean, it was really, really like sad. And
Yeah.
we had moved it a couple of different places. And I was like, no, I'm not going to give up on this plant. I know it can do well. It's supposed to be one of those ones that's easy to grow. So I'm like, come on now. We can't let a plant that's like easy be with the one that we can't keep and we can't flourish. But it was cool because I feel like that plant, and I actually put it there as a reminder of just sometimes we think things are like not going to grow or not going to, but all we have to do is sort of change a little bit, be a little bit flexible, try some new things, get out of our comfort zone. And then that's where we can really grow. And look at how pretty it is.
I know.
She's so pretty.
And this parallels nicely, perfectly. Watch this transition we're going to do from metaphorical plants and groundbreaking to what it means to be a groundbreaker in the professional sphere. Because I know one or two people know, I know very well, your career has often put you in all kinds of positions where you are breaking new ground, where you are doing things that you had never seen done before. And oftentimes, doing new things surrounded by people who had never seen them done before. And what's the old saying? They didn't think it could be done because they've never seen it done. So, when you're in these new situations and you're breaking new ground, what kind of pivotal moment has happened where you first realized at the beginning of all this that you're going to have to chart your own path rather than following one that already existed for you?
Such a good question because I think when you try to think back to like a moment or a specific thing, it's almost impossible to do. I can't actually remember one time where I was like, "Oh, this is where I can trace it back to." But I can remember a lot of different things that I think were characteristics, right? So like now I kind of know it when I see it. I think before I didn't even know it when it was happening. Like I can think back to being like a little kid. This is a story that is, I think it's funny. I don't know if everybody's gonna think it's funny, but it is kind of funny. So my parents bought me, and this was like so cool, right? I wanted so bad. It was a Flintstone car, so it was like it had that top, the yellow top and the red, what I'm talking about, like the bottom, but you like walk the car. And
Yeah.
I wanted that thing so badly, like so badly. I can remember this some of my earliest memories, like dreaming about having this like little thing. We lived in an apartment complex, and so I could just imagine like going around that circle with this car. And then I got it, and I was the talk of the town, right? Well, the
Oh,
talk of our apartment complex because I
nobody
did
could tell you nothing, huh?
nothing except that I realized very quickly that it took a lot of energy and effort to move that thing along. Like it was tiring because you had to walk it. You had to walk the car wherever you wanted to go. And I remember thinking to myself, like, wait a minute, we've never had one of these in our apartment complex. I wasn't the only kid that was coveting for it. There are other children who want to play with this. I love playing with other children. I don't actually like being the only person who's driving this.
Hmm.
Here's this new toy that's here. I would love for it to be a collective toy and a
Ah.
collective responsibility. How could we approach this differently? And so we ended up creating a pretty enterprising like setup where it was like, like everybody got a chance to play in it, but everybody got a chance to actually drive it, and everybody got a chance to actually do the work too to keep that thing moving.
Hmm.
My mom tells it funnier though. She's like, "Girl, I looked outside and you had your feet up. Somebody else was pushing that thing. They were walking it along." I don't quite remember it that way, although I'm sure there was a little bit of that. But I think of that story because
Hmm.
it is one of those like moments, right, where you are in a situation, everything is brand new, you've got something exciting or something's happening, but people don't really, or you don't even really know like how to approach it. And there's a part of it that's exciting, but there's also a part of it that's really hard. And so the question becomes like, how do you turn in that space? How do you do something differently? How do you think differently about what this maybe blessing is, but also maybe about what this to some degree burden is too?
Hmm.
And I think so. I think that's a characteristic, even though it's a funny story from when I was like 2, 3 years old. It's a funny story that I think like replicated itself in many different other instances. But you said, what's one of the first times I realized it? And that's the story that came to mind, is like realizing early on there's going to be so many things that are new that
Yep.
you are going to have to encounter. And the question is, are you going to do those things by yourself? Are you going to do those things kicking and screaming? Are you going to do those things with joy? Are you going to do those things with other people? Like, how are you going to approach it?
Hmm. Yeah. And so thank you for digging deep into the vaults about
Did you even know that story? I don't know if I've ever told you.
No.
Okay.
And I've known you for a while.
You should.
So I love that story about, I hear you were doing something new, and then very quickly you realized, how can I flip this new thing that I've done or I've been a part of, and how can I share that experience with as many people as possible?
Yeah.
Okay. So how about those situations where the experience can't be shared as easily? I mean,
Mm.
there's a Flintstone car, I get to share it with other friends in the neighborhood. That's one thing. But what about when you walk into rooms and you're the first or the only of your background, of your group, and there's nothing to share, and there's not that automatic, maybe shared experience with other people? What strategies have you developed to maintain your authenticity while still effectively navigating those spaces? Yeah.
It's funny, but I used to think that I was in those spaces by myself. And I think part of what I've come to appreciate is that even when I am the only, I'm not actually by myself. And what I mean by that is that I'm walking into spaces not just with the understanding of like, oh, I'm here, but it's with the understanding of like, I'm here, but there's been a lot of things that have happened and a lot of other people who have had to do things before I got to this space. And
Mm.
if I do it right, there'll be a lot of other people who come after me, or who come along, even better, who come alongside me while I'm still here. And I think that like sense of loneliness is a real thing. But I also think that sense of like, nah, I don't have to come in here feeling like I'm on my, like I can come here understanding that there's been a lot of like sacrifices, a lot of hard work, a lot of intentionality to get me into this seat. I think for some people that can feel like a burden, and for sure, sometimes it does feel like a burden, like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of pressure. But I think for me, it's given me like, I've grown into understanding that I can also have a lot of peace there. And so I think that's one thing that I would just say, like when I walk into a room and I feel like I'm a first or few, like I have been able to understand that in a different kind of way through experience. But
So
no,
it's like I might glance around the room and feel like I'm the only one physically here right now, but you feel accompanied by folks before you and then also folks after you. Is that
yeah,
right? Like almost a time warp thing, parallel universes happening at once.
very much so. And I think one of the powerful things about that is that because it helps you get out of that loneliness feeling, but it helps you also understand like your position, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I have a weight, but like I have this like really unique role that I can play. And so instead of feeling like, oh, how did I get here? How does it? Instead, I'm like, hey, now I
Mm,
have a very unique role to play in this situation, and I'm going to make sure that I do it at the greatest level that I can. And so
yeah.
I think that that also, right, has really been something that's fueled the way that I like to show up in spaces. Like, yeah, okay, I might be today that I'm the only, but not tomorrow if I'm doing this the way that I want to do it.
And it's not like, hey, I'm the hero of my story. It's I'm the hero of my story, an anthology of a lot of stories.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Facts. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm working through some stuff. I can't even think of a next question because I'm like, huh. But I'd like to hear you say more about kind of that weight of responsibility, because I mean, that can feel very empowering. Like I'm at the intersection between all those before me and all those after me. I can be temporarily lonely in the present moment because I am kind of pushed along by the wind of the past and propelling others into the future. But many groundbreakers also talk about that as a weight of responsibility, and knowing that their work, their performance, their behavior is micromanaged,
Yeah.
it is over monitored, and it is extrapolated. So everything that you do can often be interpreted as stuff everybody like you also does. So
Mhm.
how do you manage that pressure of feeling uh, what the fancy word is compulsory perfectionism?
Yeah.
That not just I have to protect myself from any faults and failings because I'm overwhelmed by criticism. No, on behalf of everybody who I'm representing, I can't do anything less than be absolutely perfect. How do you manage that extraordinary pressure?
One, I think the like sitting with it and actually realizing and having that feeling, because I think to pretend that it's not there isn't healthy, right? Like I do think that that pressure is real. I think it happens. It certainly happens to me. It still happens to me. It's not even like a past tense thing. It still happens to me on a pretty regular basis. And so I think one is just the acknowledgement, like you're not making that up. That's in your that is a real feeling, and it deserves your attention. It deserves some time. It deserves some space. It deserves all the feels that come with it, right?
Mm.
Because there's a lot of feels that come with it. I think that's one. I think the second thing is making sure that you have other people, whether if you're the only one in your team, your department, that project, whatever it might be, that you have identified other people who you can have a shared safe space with. And so for me, that has been in so many different forms, just and I can't even begin to. I mean, you're one of them, right? Like safe spaces to be able to um, share that. Because again, I think where it becomes the hardest, and when it becomes and stays that feeling of burden, is when you're lonely, when you're
Mm.
trying to handle it all by yourself. And so I think being able to have spaces and places where you can go and talk about that and share that is really important. I'm going to say something else too that I think is something that people don't really talk about, but I
Talk
also think
about it.
that part of what you have to do is make sure that you are operationalizing covering yourself.
Mm.
What I mean by that is, because you have this like perfectionism and you have all these other things that are on you, being able to like keep reality at the forefront, not just for yourself, but also for others. And so I've gotten really good at self evaluation. I've got really good
Mm.
at rehearsing facts. I've got really good at getting clarity on what expectations are and then demonstrating like my ability to meet them so that I'm not chasing somebody else's. And that's another thing too. Like I'm very clear on what my purpose is, and I'm very clear
Mhm.
on how I measure myself. And so I don't have to chase after somebody else's whatever, because I've already identified what it is that's most critical and crucial for who I am and how I want to show up and how I want to be measured. And so that certainty too is like you couldn't. There is not enough money in the world that would take that I would do or that anything, not even money. There's not enough much treasure, not enough whatever that I would trade off that sense of purpose with, because it really it helps you get away from a moving target that's like impossible to fill, or other people's impressions or other people's opinions or other people's whatever perceptions, and moves you into a place where you're controlling the assessment, right? You're controlling like what your goals are, what you're actually going after. So those are some of the things that I think have made that burden, like turn that burden into opportunity.
And also something that I see groundbreakers doing who thrive in that space when they're faced with the pressure to be perfect is that they move beyond evaluation, where they're constantly critiquing what they do, and they move to a constant reminder of what they find important.
Mm,
So it's not, did I do this task perfectly?
yeah.
It's no, am I moving and striving to try and perfect the things I find important? So it's almost moving away from evaluating to valuating. To constantly reminding myself, what is my purpose? What do I value? I can fall short. I can mess up
Yeah.
without dishonoring the ancestors or my progenitors who are coming after me, my descendants. I can mess up on a task. Well, as long as I'm staying in my purpose.
Yep.
And it's not about what I do as much as I'm constantly focusing on what I value, what are my core principles, who I am.
Who I am.
Okay.
And that's not like something you just wake up and do either. I just want to be clear, like that took a lot of patience with myself, a lot of grace, a lot of mistakes, a lot of like not doing it right and getting all those repercussions. But it's really nice to be here.
But being here, in addition to being a groundbreaker, as like, hey, I'm often the first, the few, the only. What can be so overwhelming is not having a roadmap, not having a visual model of what it looks like, but also not having like verbal written down advice that's often applicable. So
Yes.
I'm sure you encountered all kinds of situations where traditional leadership advice just doesn't fit your circumstances. You're like, I'm sure that's worked for many folks before. That will not work for me. So, what are examples of conventional wisdom that you've had to unlearn and adapt and flip and modify to develop your own leadership style?
Whew, this is such an intense list. And there's so many things because there's like everything from like you should talk like this to like you should wear these kinds of clothes or your hair should be a certain kind of way,
Mm.
are things that I've been either implicitly or explicitly told. So many things. If you want to succeed, you have to do X, Y, Z. Um, and those things, or you shouldn't do X, Y, Z. And those things just really don't don't work, right? Like they sometimes they just didn't fly. And so I think part of it goes back to what I said earlier, like surrounding yourself with people who do understand your background and understand where you're at, and really like investing in those relationships, whether they're sponsors or mentors. Part of that is like learning how to get those sponsors and mentors and people that you trust that can help guide you along the way, because this isn't a solo sport, right? This is really like a team sport. So I think that is one of the like literally the biggest things, because you can't take advice from just anybody. And I can give you some examples, right? Like people would be like, oh, Deanna, you know what? You should really straighten your hair. Like you need to make your hair look like, and this and that. Do you know how much I love my curls? I love every single one of these curls, but there was a time where I didn't, because I was told so often that they were going to hold me back. And so that's an example, right? I was told you can't wear bright clothing. Today's not a perfect example of this, but if you see me in real life and walking around, it is not uncommon for me to have yellow pants on and a pink blazer and like whatever, like, because that's part of my culture and it's part of like who I am. And not doing that depressed me, right? Like not showing up in that way. And just any kind, oh, Deanna, you are just too loud. You know what? This is my voice. And
Yep.
I get excited and I laugh, and I have a distinctive laugh, and that's okay. But these are all things, again, that at some point or another, I was told, like, nah, you can't, you're not gonna be able to succeed, or you're not gonna be able to move forward if you have those things. And I feel like the more we hear that, the more we start to maybe believe it if we don't have something that's counter. And the more that, not even if somebody says to, the more that you see it, like, wow, everybody in here wears, black blazers. Everybody in here has straight hair. Everybody in here speaks quietly, or speaks like this, or speaks what. The more you start to think like, oh yeah, that might actually be accurate.
Yeah.
And so it's having some of those counter narratives and being really intentional about it that allows for you to know who you are, and to be able to kind of own that space. And here's what I've come to find out. You will not, well, Justin, you'll believe this because you see this all the time. People will be like, oh my gosh, I totally recognized you because of your hair. Like, I saw that bright pink blazer, and Deanna, I knew that was you. Or, right, not only are those things authentic to who I am, but those are also things that resonate with other people.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and have helped me find my crew. And so I think that's one of the things that I like. Again, that was a very, very painful learning process, because I feel like I lost some of who I was and had to go back and refine her.
Yeah. And so it seems like I hear you saying a key part of being a groundbreaker is, rather than fitting in, first finding who you are. So rather than fitting, finding. And I hear you saying that the example of the hair there, once you figure out who you are and how to be comfortable in that, you don't have to fit in, because people will seek you out.
Yeah, people will find you.
All right. So you've given us a lot to think about. All kinds of things about thinking about how we can flourish in our own groundbreaking, maybe getting into soil and temperatures and sunlight schemes that are a little uncomfortable for us. But look at that plant going from 2 leaves to all that, with a little bit of moving around and growing and breaking ground it didn't think it could. So thank you for giving us a lot to think about as we try to break ground and flourish as well. Thank you.
Of course, and thank you. And thank you to everybody who is listening in real time and also listening later on. We really appreciate you. Justin and I are we really look forward to these conversations, because it's an opportunity not only to learn more about one another, but also to learn from all of you. So I appreciate all your comments and your suggestions for other topic areas and other things that you might be considering, and just hope that we can continue to learn from one another, because we really believe, right, in order for us to uplift, impact, we have to be able to find ways to have conversations together and learn together and uplift together. So thanks, Justin.
Thank you, Deanna.
Bye.